In 2007, this small Cornish village woke up to extraordinary news. Calstock is a quiet spot tucked away in a loop of the River Tamar. Suddenly, it was home to a discovery that meant history books would have to be rewritten. Certainly it was news that would change the village's ideas about itself as a place. Long before the parish church was built, there were Romans here. Big news because it was generally thought the Romans hadn't settled farther west than Exeter, 45 miles away. And we're not talking just a few Romans.
So my name's Chris Smart. I'm an archaeologist from the University of Exeter. I was involved with the discovery of the fort back in 2007 and have led the project from an archaeological perspective ever since. So I'm in charge of the excavations here at the Roman fort this year and have been in previous years as well. We were originally here looking for remains associated with late 13th century and 14th century royal silver mining, which we knew was occurring on the opposite side of the River Tamar in Beerferres parish. But actually what we found using geophysical survey was the remains of a square Roman fort. The fort sits on this long ridge that sits above the loop in the River Tamar, with Calstock at the south, Morwellum Quay over to the north. St Andrew's Church, we're stood on top of its tower, is here, so it's just north of centre of the fort's middle. The fort itself extends not only behind the medieval church into the historic burial ground with the 18th and 19th century graves, through the parish cemetery and then into the open grass fields that straddle either side of Church Hill going down into Calstock. Based on the number of barrack blocks we've seen from our surveys and initial excavations in 2009 in the modern parish cemetery, we understand there to be 10 barrack blocks, each housing circa 50 men. So we're looking at a permanent garrison over 30 years, so about 500 soldiers. And this is an auxiliary unit, this isn't a legionary unit, this is an auxiliary unit of the 2nd Augusta, who were based in Exeter at the fortress there. Well, we're actually on the outside of the Roman fort here at Calstock, and broadly the line of headstones that's in the modern parish cemetery represents the western defences of the fort. The ridge that we have behind us on which the cars are placed and the sun shelter, that's the line of the Roman road that exited the west gate, and we think it's well made for probably about 200 metres. The reason why we're actually digging here, it's not so much we've located our trench for any particular to answer research questions. It's simply because the parish council have a need to continue extending the parish cemetery here. They have existing planning permission in place for that extension, so we have got heritage lottery money to enable us to come in and record all the archaeology prior to it being used for burial, which would otherwise destroy what is here in the ground. Most archaeology projects that involve heritage lottery funding will involve to a good degree community archaeology, and we've had up to 20-25 volunteers per day of the excavation here, and the feedback we're getting is that most of our volunteers are finding this a different experience because they're actually being involved in the process of archaeological excavation and recording from the very beginning to the very end point. They're not just being asked to dig out soil, they're involved with the drawing and the photography and the final recording of things that they've dug out, and then carrying that on through into working on the finds that we're making.
My name is Dave Williams. I live local and I'm here as a volunteer. I've worked on this site before doing the original geophys, working with Pete Nicholas, and I have been working on other project requests, and this was an opportunity to actually get some field work in. Yeah, well, what we're doing here basically is we're processing the finds, or it's the first process, which means we're washing the pots. But we've got some really interesting pieces, particularly Roman Samian ware. High status, certainly not made in this country, probably southern Gaul or even as far as Italy. But the pattern indicates it's top quality stuff. Interesting pieces as well, it's got a repair, which I've only had pointed out this morning. It's got a hole in it which has been pierced or filled with a plug of lead. Other things, we've got whetstones used for sharpening, knives, maybe sickles, even scythes. Smooth on one side, obviously, where the sharpening is, and it's even got striations evident where occasionally the knife or the tool being sharpened is dug in. One of the most interesting finds that I've seen today, once again we have to be careful with it, is a piece of glass, and this has been identified as being medieval. And if you look at it, it's pretty rough. it's pitted, it's semi-opaque. But if we compare this, and I must be a bit careful because this is fragile, with a piece of Roman glass, that's typical Roman glass, a sort of a light bluish tinge, the difference in quality is amazing. And to see the Romans produce something like that, and then a piece of medieval glass, you can see that glass making has regressed, because that is very, very crude compared to that really lovely piece of Roman.
My name is Murray Brown, and I live locally in Calstock, and I've been very interested in all the developments and findings of the Roman fort for the last decade, almost last decade. So I was particularly interested to hear that they were looking for volunteers for this summer's dig, and having recently retired from my job, I took up the opportunity and will be working here for the full 4 weeks.
Every week on a Tuesday we have refugees join us as a part of the START programme. That's students and refugees together who come and help us out digging. Rizgar has been helping out matching out the Roman road today. It's been brilliant. It's really helpful actually. Just this morning we lifted up some amphora, which is different, very different to what we found over there. Whether that's attributable to differing weathering conditions, or whether it's actually a different type of amphora, a different age or something, we're yet to find out.
My name's Libby, and I've been studying for the last 3 years at the University of Exeter, and I'm here really as a placement student, so especially to work with the refugees who are coming here and supervise them and involve them in this work, but also supervise people and teach them generally, and just explore the archaeology here really.
I'm Emma Marie Hasel. I'm a postgraduate student at the University of Michigan. I've been located in London recently doing archival research, and I'm here right now because I've always wanted to be part of an archaeological dig.
The range of material that we're getting here at Calstock reflects general rubbish associated with the activity of the army. This is an imported Roman military mixing or grinding bowl, a mortaria, produced in France, or some are produced in Spain and imported to the UK. This one will have been broken simply because it will have been worn in the centre to the point that the bottom has essentially gone out of the pot, and therefore it's been thrown away into the rubbish pit. But you can see the idea of a mixing bowl with a pouring spout. Other less interesting objects in terms of their visual appearance, a concreted lump of iron, actually when you start to consider its form and perhaps its function and compare it with other known examples, this actually becomes a Roman key. You can see the head of the key and the handle here, and we have parallels for this exact form from the fortress in Exeter. So this will go off to a team of conservationists who will unpick the concretion and x-ray it, and the x-ray will probably show a really well preserved key. As well as the later medieval occupation, which then becomes associated with the church. Way back in prehistory, the site was actually being used from the Middle Bronze Age, so 2,500 BC, so 4,500 years before present. When we find sherds of Bronze Age beaker ceramics, this was actually excavated in an earlier phase in a shallow pit associated with lots of charcoal, and it's probable that this is actually part of a funerary urn, so an urn that would have contained the remains of a cremation, then buried in the ground, and a burial mound would have been placed on top of it. Here on the ridge it would have had a very prominent position, kind of overlooking the Tamar in all directions, and Hingston down to the west, where actually burial mounds of this age actually survive. So it appears that later land use as these burial monuments of prehistory have actually been lost, but we as archaeologists can find this rather nicely made and well decorated ceramic forms which tell us something about activity well before the army, the Roman army, arrived here in Calstock.
The other thing is, of course, we're always learning. We're coming across new things all the time, and it adds to the fund of knowledge. We never know everything. It's good fun and it's very interesting work.
It's been an absolutely extraordinary week, sort of spending time in the archaeological dig here.